My name is Laurie. I live in Los Angeles, California. I was diagnosed in spring of 2006 at the age of 46 with follicular non-Hodgkin lymphoma, stage 4. At the time, I was the president of a financial software company that I had worked for already for 22 years, and I am married. I was 40 years old when I had my son, and a few years after that, when he was about 3, I started to get frequent sinus infections that just wouldn't go away. And I would go to the ear, nose, and throat doctor. I would be given antibiotics, and, I would just be on antibiotics for months at a time. About the same time, I developed a very dry right eye. I was a long-time contact lens wearer. Suddenly, I couldn't wear my contacts because my eye was so dry. And then I had felt a lump in my abdomen, which my doctors had told me was a hernia that probably happened when I birthed my son. And I just went from doctor to doctor to doctor. I was also increasingly fatigued. But I couldn't get any doctors to take me seriously. And so I spent 3 years, from 2003 to 2006, trying to get someone to listen to me. So I was, a frequent flyer, flying back east, flying to London, flying to Dublin, flying wherever I needed to go for work, and, trying to stay well enough to be able to do my job. But I finally, and I remember what brought it to a crux for me was the internist I was working with at the time. I said, could you run my blood work? Could you do a metabolic panel? Could you do, a CBC? And he said, why? He said, what's that going to accomplish? I said, it was so bizarre. And I said, because if there's something wrong, if something's really elevated, perhaps then we'll be able to point the finger at what's going on. So he finally ran all the blood work, and then he called me. He said, Laurie, everything is normal. So you don't have cancer, which now I know what a ridiculous thing to say, because people get cancer all the time that have normal blood work. And, and so the founder of the business that I had taken over and become president of when I was 38, the founder's wife was going to someone that she really thought was an excellent diagnostician. So I went to see him, and I said, they're saying this is from allergies, this lump that's causing sinus infections. They're saying my eye is because of hormones, my age, I'm getting dry eye more. They're saying this thing in my abdomen is a hernia, maybe from when my son was born. And they're saying I'm really tired because, like, the doctors would say, no wonder you're tired. Look at what you're doing. You're running a business. You're traveling a week to 2 a month. You have a young son, and you're running a household, because this is what women do. We have to do it all. And he said, I'm exhausted just listening to you. So finally, this new diagnostician, I said, Laurie, we don't guess about this. He said, yeah, this feels like it could be a hernia. But right now I'm going to call a hernia specialist, get him on the phone. We're going to get you in to get a CT scan. This is why we have CT machines. So this was right before Good Friday in 2006. And they sent me to this hernia doctor to do a CT scan and discovered I had a tumor the size of a grapefruit in my abdomen. And, oh, by the way, you have spots on your lung. So you may actually have 2 cancers. You may have lung cancer, and you may have either a mesenchymal tumor or lymphoma. My first reaction was, and so when the diagnostician told me this, he said, oh, and I've gone ahead and I've made an appointment for you on Tuesday to see an oncologist at this good practice at a big research hospital. So we're talking about the process. And suddenly, and I was just in shock. Like, I had no way. No one ever expects to hear you have cancer. No one. I guarantee you. And I'm sitting there thinking, oh my gosh. And then I said to him after about a half hour, I said, yeah, I can't go to Chicago or New York, can I? He said, I wouldn't recommend it. You need to get on this. You need to find out what this is. Is it lymphoma? Is it a mesenchymal tumor? Do you have a secondary lung cancer? Yeah. And then I was kind of cut off and left the office on my own, called my husband to tell him the scary news, called a friend, actually at work. I mean, I was walking zombie. I can't even believe I drove home and got home safely. And that's the thing, when you're diagnosed, the patient, clearly, you learn very quickly you are on your own and you have to figure everything out on yourself, by yourself, or find someone who can help you navigate. So I just went into a pit of depression, and I remember going in for the PET scan the next week, and we had a little extra time, so we were sitting in a park. My husband and I were just sitting in a park, sort of passing time, and I remember the sanitation engineers were there emptying the trash cans, and I just wanted to trade places with them. I wanted to be anybody but myself, and my body had let me down completely. I looked in the mirror. I was angry. Like, I was never a smoker. I never had these habits. Now I might have lung cancer and lymphoma, So I remember just being so alienated from my own body that I didn't even feel like I was part of my own body. It was like I was looking at this person in the mirror and I'm like, who is that? Who is that person? What the heck? What happened? So it was unreal. The next week, they did a PET CT, and oh my gosh, everything lit up. Okay? So you remember I said I had a dry eye? Well, I had a tumor in my tear duct that was blocking the production of my tears. So that's why I had dry eye. The lump in my neck that I was told was because of allergies and sinus infections, it lit up positive on the PET CT. It was cancer. The thing in my abdomen was cancer. It was throughout my bone marrow. We couldn't tell if it was my bone marrow or my bone. It was basically, I lit up like a Christmas tree. So stage 4, they did a bone marrow biopsy. Over my 12 years fighting cancer, I had like 15 bone marrow biopsies, which I can tell you is no fun. And so that was the first step, was like determining the staging. And then they had to biopsy the largest tumor. When I was diagnosed, there were 36 types of lymphoma. They have now categorized, the pathologists have now categorized it, so there are over 100 types of lymphoma. And, they're getting smarter at looking at genetic mutations, etc. But you really need to know the diagnosis 100% before you start treatment, because if you treat for the wrong, and as a patient advocate, I've talked to many patients who were misdiagnosed because they were in a little community oncology center where the pathology wasn't expert enough to know how many stains they had to do. And oftentimes with a lymphoma diagnosis, it takes 8 days to get the pathology report back. And when people tell me, oh, they got their pathology in 1 day, it really worries me because you can't grow it that fast. And it's kind of like you go through these trees and different staining, and depending upon how it lights up, you go down a different path. So I had a biopsy. They ended up doing a full, they removed a piece of the lymph node, of the biggest, the mothership, or the mother lode, we called it. It was in my abdomen that was, huge, bulky, and, I can't even remember, was it 8 centimeters? I can't remember now. But so they removed that, and after about a week and a half, I got the biopsy result back that it was follicular non-Hodgkin lymphoma, which is B-cell lymphoma, the second most common type of non-Hodgkin lymphoma after diffuse large B-cell, and considered an incurable disease. So the most common type of non-Hodgkin, which is diffuse large B-cell, is 90% plus curable with one treatment. Follicular, the expectation is that you may get it into remission, but you've not gotten rid of it and it's going to come back. I had 4 consults because I wanted to see if there were any newer things coming that maybe I could take advantage of. And after those 4 consults, it was clear there was only one treatment, which was a combination of a monoclonal antibody, 3 chemo drugs, and a steroid. And the plan was to get 6 rounds, potentially 8 if it wasn't working, but hopefully only 6, and they would be every 3 weeks. So a total of 18 weeks was the plan. So I went through all 6 lines. I had delays here and there because my white count dropped and I couldn't get the chemos until my white count recovered. But basically within about 20 weeks, I had finished the 6 cycles. And after my 3rd cycle, they had PET CT'd me to see if it was working. Because if it's not working, they don't want you to have more. They want you to try to switch you onto some other plan, although I'm not sure what the plan would have been. But after my 3rd scan, all my PET positive disease was dead. So the tumors had receded to nothing, or it appeared there was just scar tissue left. So it appeared I had I whacked the ball out of the park with those first 3 cycles. And I said, oh, please, can I stop now? They said, no, we have to finish the protocol. So we did the other 3 and I imaged. Then I wanted to go back right away to work because I'd gone out on a short-term leave because there was no way I could work while I went through this treatment because it was a pretty brutal treatment combination. So my oncologist said to me, Laurie, I want you to wait 2 months to go back to work. I want you to recover and I don't want you to travel initially, but let's wait 2 months. So 2 months later, I went back to work, went back to my life, thought I was done. They said, oh my gosh, you had such a great response. You're going to get a long-term remission. They said 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. So I was doing a maintenance monoclonal antibody every 3 months where I would go and take a day off work, go in and get maintenance monoclonal antibody. And then they said, okay, we're going to scan you because we're going to do every 3-month scans initially. And then we'll move you to 6 months and then once a year. So I'm all on board for this. So I go in for the follow-up scan and guess what? The tumors were coming back in my lungs. So I was already relapsing. So at that point, we decided I would watch and wait. I stayed at work. I began to research alternative treatments. Alternative, not meaning alternative, go to Mexico, but new things I might try with Western med. And we just slowly watched as the tumors came back more and more and more. And I think I can't remember, we were scanning every 6 months. And I started to go in and consult with doctors who had trials. And bottom line, what came back to me was that the only option I had was an autologous stem cell transplant. And after I had been considered in complete remission, we had harvested my stem cells. So we had done the apheresis, so my stem cells were in the freezer at a large stem cell facility in Southern California. And so the plan was that was what I would do next. But then I started to research the result of stem cell transplants for follicular non-Hodgkin lymphoma and for patients who quickly relapse after that brutal first treatment that I had had. And the odds were terrible. I reflected on the numbers with him and I said, if it was an 80% chance, then yeah, I'd go for it. But 20%? And then I hit him with this problem I had of being away from my son for a month. My son was now in 1st grade. I am still the head of household. My husband has his own business. Very long hours my husband had. And I couldn't work out how we could do that. I said, if you could give me 80%, we'll figure out how to make it work. But this way, I just can't do it. So he said, okay, Laurie, he said, I'm going to see if I can find you a clinical trial. And we'll see if we can get you on a clinical trial and buy you some time until something better comes along. So that night he called me. He had a clinical trial, which was an HDAC inhibitor. It was a phase 2 trial, and that was my second line of therapy. And that was my first clinical trial after the approved line of treatment I had done. And it was a pill. He said, oh, it's going to be really easy. It's a pill. You just take it from home. Once a month, you'll come in and you'll get a monoclonal antibody infusion. So I said, wow, sounds easy. I'll tell you, that pill was wicked. I was sicker on that pill than I was on the chemotherapy that I'd had. But it capped off my cancer. We could feel the tumors were no longer growing. And then they stabilized. And then they actually began to shrink for a bit. And of course, I was getting lots of imaging, bone marrow biopsies, to see what was going on. And unfortunately, after about 11 months, the cancer outsmarted the drug again. And I was thrown out of the trial because I had certain growth in the lymph nodes. A couple new treatments had been approved for follicular non-Hodgkin lymphoma. So I did my usual. I made my rounds to the doctors. So now I've been treated at 2 places. And I'm rounding to all these other places to find out what's approved. And I learn of a new radioimmunotherapy that's been approved. And this is where they inject a radioactive isotope into you. And it targets the cancer, but it leaves your healthy cells alone. And then we got the cancer reduced to the point where we could stop that chemotherapy and I could get the radioimmunotherapy. So in December, I got the radioimmunotherapy, which was my 4th line of treatment, which was a one and done. So they infuse you with a radioactive isotope, and then you go home and you have to isolate for 8 days because you're radioactive for 8 days. I remember one Sunday morning reading the newspaper with my husband, having our coffee, and I leaned over like this, and I felt a tumor. So my cancer was already coming back. So I called the oncologist the next day. He says, come on in, let's scan you. It didn't work. It was everywhere again. So now I've had 4 treatments at 3 different cancer centers. And the only thing left for me was an allogeneic stem cell transplant. And with an allogeneic stem cell transplant, you get a donor's stem cells. Ideally, and you get that donor's immune system. It gets rid of your own immune system. If you have AB positive blood and your donor's O, you now have O blood. Switches your blood type. The ideal is that you have an identical twin, because then you have a perfect match. I didn't have an identical twin. I had 2 siblings. The ideal is that you have 4 siblings, because each sibling only has a 1 in 4 chance there'll be a match. So my mom should have had 5 of us. She only had 3, and neither of my siblings were matches. So right there, I have to go to the donor bank. The risk increases. Because if you don't have a sibling match, you're at greater risk for what's called graft versus host disease, where your new immune system begins to attack your organs. It can attack your skin, so you can't go out in the sun. It can attack your liver. It can attack your kidneys. I met a woman who had a rare situation where she got GVHD that attacked her optic nerve, and she was blind in one eye. And so you think, oh, wow, so I got rid of the lymphoma, and then what's my quality of life? The other risk is that when you do an allotransplant, they chemo you to where they destroy your own immune system in preparation for getting your new immune system. And when that happens, you have no protection for anything, any little germ, any little bacteria. This lead investigator on a trial at another big cancer center in LA called me. He said, I have a clinical trial. It's phase 1. It's very early. It's a PI3 kinase inhibitor. So it targets specific cells only on your cancer cells. It's a pill you take twice a day. But I only have 20 slots in the trial. I've already filled 19. I only have 1 left, so I need to see you today, because otherwise one of my associates will give that away. So I went in to see him. We signed the trial paperwork. We did the necessary biopsies and everything that had to be done to prove I had the right disease type. And then just a week later, I started. And I was in a line of the trial where I got a monoclonal antibody plus this oral PI3 kinase inhibitor. I was on that drug for 5.5 years. After nothing had worked. And it never got rid of my cancer, but it kept me stable for 5.5 years. So it reduced my cancer and then it held it stable. So I would have to have periodic images because if I was growing again, I would be removed from the trial. And stable disease for 5.5 years, which for me was a win. I was out on a walk, really sick in the spring of 2018, and I get a call and I look at the caller ID and it's my oncologist calling. He says, "Great news. The trial is opening for CAR T. I will have 5 patients in the first cohort." I went in for CAR T in July of 2018. July 16, 2018 was my birthday. And my first image, August 15, 2018, I was cancer-free for the first time since 2006. And the day after I got out of the hospital, we all were supposed to go to D.C. to move my son into his dorm, but I ended up being in the hospital longer than we anticipated after CAR T. I just had my 6-year study visit, and I'm still clean. And now they think, even though follicular is still considered incurable, they think I'm cured. They tell me I'm cured. And I still have CAR T cells on board. Twice a year, they run a lymphocyte enumeration report that tells me if I have any CD19 B cells, and because that was the target for the CAR T, and I still have 0. So my CAR T cells are still on board. 6 years later, I developed avascular necrosis in my femoral head. My femur collapsed because of all the steroids I was on. I had to get a replacement. I had to get a major surgery back at the end of May. That's not from CAR T. That's from all the steroids for the 12 years before CAR T. So getting CAR T as my 7th line saved my life. But if I could have got it as first line, let alone third, it's available as 3rd line right now. I was so lucky and I'm so grateful. And, I fought for my little kid. And my husband said, "Well, what about me?" And I said, "Well, I didn't want you to have to go tell him that I died, but I also knew you could get another wife. But my little boy, right, he can't get another mommy or daddy." So that was my I couldn't do it to him. I was going to do anything and everything. I would have gone to the ends of the earth. So, but yeah, when I had to get my hip replacement and my necrosis dealt with, I went to this orthopedic surgeon who was going to do the surgery, and he had read my history because they all share the portals now, He's like, "Why did you do that for so long?" I said, "Because I had a little kid. He was in kindergarten. Was I going to give up? No. I was going to fight." The most important thing is to get to a specialist who can confirm your diagnosis and knows all the treatment options. Do whatever you can. Do not rely on a general oncologist who does not know the ins and outs of over 100 types of non-Hodgkin lymphoma. That would be, because if you're in the wrong hands, I've seen it through the patient. I've supported, oh my gosh, I don't know how many, over 100 patients. And the outcomes vary according to who they see and whose hands they're in. But the second most important thing, you have to advocate for yourself. The doctors aren't going to do it. You're your own most important. It's your life. You have to advocate for yourself. And if you cannot do that, you have to find someone who will do that for you, who will reach out to doctors, reach out to nonprofits, look for trials, get consults. You can do consults telephonically now. You don't have to go back to Boston for a consult. You can get your records out there and do it on since COVID, COVID was horrible. But since COVID has created a new method for patients. Take advantage of those new methods. and advocate for yourself or get someone else to advocate on your behalf.